want to talk to you a little bit about something before we get into our next little article here. Everyone's heard the phrase, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And I believe that. I really do. I don't think you necessarily have to be like a really hardcore gun enthusiast or, to just recognize that that's how you stop a bad guy with a gun, is a good guy with a gun. Now, I don't think the cops are good guys. I think when you say that phrase, you're talking about like you or me. If you or me have a gun and we're at the mall and somebody's shooting up the place,
Yeah.
then you could be the hero and you could put a stop to it. June 21st, earlier this year, was that like the second day of summer, I think. Arvada, Colorado. 59-year-old Ronald Troike, resident crazy person with an axe to grind against the local PD, which totally doesn't describe anyone else.
No.
He writes a 4-page note that basically culminates with that he's going to head out that day with his rifle and he's going to, quote, kill as many police officers as I can. And then he makes good on that threat. First thing he does is he gets to work. He goes out and guns down Arvada police officer Gordon Beasley. And he's armed to continue a would-be mass shooting. But then enters the scene 40-year-old John Hurley. Hurley's just a salt-of-the-earth kind of guy. Outdoorsman type. Loves liberty. Believes in personal responsibility. Believes in self-defense. So he was armed as well. And he happened to be shopping at a local Army surplus store when he heard the shots ring out outside where Troike had just murdered Officer Beasley. No hesitation. And I think about that sometimes because you always think to yourself, well, if I had been there, I'd have done something. But you think to yourself, even if you were there and even if you had a gun, and even if the guy's back was turned to you, you're entering in because there's that fight or flight mentality, and most people's natural instinct is flight. And if you could just leave, it's probably what you would do. Like, let's be honest with ourselves here.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes something within you to put that thought aside and say, no, I'm going to go out there and make a difference. And that's what he does. He rushes out there. He confronts the shooter, Troike. Shoots 6 times, I believe. Takes him down. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. But the story doesn't end there, which should. John Hurley should be paraded down the street as a hero. But he's not. And he's not because then the next officer on the scene shows up. And there's no video evidence of this, by the way. He claims that what he sees is this John Hurley picking up the rifle from this other guy and starts walking towards him with it. And he claims that because he just assumes that this is the shooter. This is the mass shooter that just came out on the radio. It's the guy walking towards me with a rifle. And so there's no stop, there's no freeze, there's no don't shoot. He just opened fire on him. And John Hurley is shot in the pelvis. He dies as well. Now, this certainly isn't the first time that the police have wrongfully murdered someone. But this one's particularly bad because not only is this guy's a hero. Everyone who was there, who witnessed the events, is like, this guy just saved a bunch of people's lives. Who even knows what would have happened next? Crazy dude's walking around with his AR. John Hurley goes out there and stops him. And his thanks is to be gunned down himself in turn by the police. He stops a cop killer. Troike's out looking for cops to shoot. Hurley stops him, and the cops kill him in turn. That is not hyperbole. That is what happened. Now, the cops will claim that Hurley was then walking towards them with a rifle, and they fired upon him. But we don't have any. We have video evidence of Troike showing up on the scene and gunning down a cop, but we don't have any of that video evidence of what they're claiming Hurley did or didn't do. So that's been months. That was June. It's November. All these months go by, and finally the news is out. Dave, go ahead and show people the article. Guess what? no charges will be filed against Arvada officer who killed hero John Hurley. That's not really a surprise, though, is it? I mean, this happens all the time. Whether it's qualified immunity, shoulda, woulda, coulda. I'm going to read this to you. District Attorney Alexis King announced her decision to not file charges Monday, more than 4 months after the incident on June 21st. She says, quote, "Our role was to look at the facts and compare them to law. The officer here had objectively reasonable grounds to believe and did believe that he and other people were in imminent danger of being killed. The officer's decisions to shoot John Hurley were legally justified, despite his heroic actions that day." Legally justified. Now that's an interesting phrase that she uses there, because that's just factually incorrect, since we know for a fact that Hurley was not a threat to anyone else. In fact, he was the hero that ended the threat. That is factually incorrect. Now, if you want to claim that the officer misinterpreted the scene that he came upon, now that's an argument to be made. But to then skirt it under the rug as legally justified is ridiculous on its face. Now, here's the thing, because it's always rules for thee and not for me. That is always at the base of every single one of these stories that happens. If you or I made a tragic mistake, if you or I, whether it was a accidental discharge, I mean, hell, we can be playing in our backyard with fireworks and something bad can happen and someone could get hurt. A neighbor passing by, someone walking down the street. It'd be a terrible tragedy. It would be an accident. And no one could deny it. You'd still be in fucking trouble, wouldn't you?
You would.
No one would say you were legally justified in doing what you did despite it being an accident. There would still be consequences for your actions. But that's just for you or me. It's not for the PD. I want to read down a little bit further. John Hurley that day acted as a hero. Had he survived, we would have praised his bravery in engaging a mass shooter before anyone else was killed, King said. Now, this is the district attorney, by the way. He acted to defend others, and we will remember him in his selflessness. This is her following up. This is the DA now. We hope our decision not to file charges will bring a small piece of closure to those affected, and that in his finality there is some healing. What? We hope our decision to not hold people accountable for their actions, and for your son or brother or father or whatever to have died a hero at our hands, we hope that brings you some peace, maybe a little closure. What? Those words came out of this bitch's fucking mouth. She says that the legitimate presence of danger was an overwhelming factor in the decision not to file charges. He was only 40 years old. He'd worked as a chef. He's described as humble, super respectful, in addition to being a hard worker. Loved hiking, biking, fishing, playing music, spending time with his family. The autopsy report released in September determined Hurley was killed by a single gunshot to the pelvis. His manner of death was labeled a homicide. His manner of death was labeled as a homicide. Again, if I was waving my gun around in the room, saying, "Hey, everybody, look at me, I'm Wyatt Earp," and it goes off and I hit somebody, that's an accident. It's a stupid accident, but it's an accident. But me saying it was an accident would not bring that person back, nor would it shield me from the consequences of my poor decisions. Now, all of that is predicated on the story that he picked up the rifle from Troike that he had just shot and then was turning towards police, and then they shot him.
Yeah.
Two notes on that. One, again, they absolutely have footage of it. They have body cams, and yet nowhere to be found. They even have footage of cameras right outside the store showing the whole incident of Troikey pulling up and gunning down the other officer. And yet, no footage of what happened to Hurley. Funny that. And even so, that still does not change the fact that an officer murdered an innocent person. I quite frankly don't care what the circumstances were. I think that they're lying about the circumstances, but I don't care what the circumstances were because a police officer murdered an innocent person and will suffer no consequences for his actions because they don't play by the same rules as you or me. They get to get away with such things. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And Ronald Troikey was a bad guy with a gun, and John Hurley was a good guy with a gun, and he stopped him. And that's a great story. And then the cops came, because cops being a great way to stop good guys with guns, they came and stopped John Hurley. You know what that makes the cops? It makes them the bad guys. You know how you stop a bad guy with a gun?